And we are back from a much needed break. And I want to talk about the importance of trans women, specifically Black trans women, especially since it is Women's History Month. And I am going to be taking this information from the book, A Black Woman's History of the United States. And then I will leave you with some notable Black trans women at the end of the video. So I want to set the scene because I am going to be talking about Frances Thompson. And one of the things that I think we forget is that so often history repeats itself. And amongst a lot of the things happening today politically and things that people have said in regards to, well, Black people should have their own this and that and this and that. Well, we tried that in the past and it didn't go so well. Namely, let's talk about the Memphis riot of 1866. And I am looking at my screen because I am currently on blackpast.org. And essentially, the Memphis riot occurred because a white police officer attempted to arrest a Black ex-soldier. And there were about 50 Black people that showed up to stop the police from jailing him. And one of the things that I do want to mention right out the gate is when you are talking about Black people, specifically when you are a non-Black author, it is really important to capitalize the B. We want to do that. Or just use the term African American, because this is why it's important to pay attention to who is writing the stories. And I call that out because I did notice that on this particular write-up, and the author is not a Black author. That's important. Identity is important for everyone. So with that, coming out of this riot also came to be the 14th Amendment, making all ex-slave citizens. And the 1866 elections was a mess, jail. But that's for another day. Okay, so I'm jumping back into the book. And in 1876, Frances Thompson, a formerly enslaved Black woman, was arrested in Memphis and fined $50. She had migrated to the area a decade earlier, at the time maybe full of hope and excitement as she began her new life as a free woman in the city. She made friends and lived in a booming Black community. In 1866, the reason why I started with the Memphis riot was because I wanted to connect to her. So in 1866, she would survive an extraordinary violence that decimated her neighborhood. Just a year after emancipation, Frances would testify before a congressional committee. One of 5 Black women to tell their stories that day, Frances, who relied on crutches because of a foot malady, described how she had been robbed and gang raped by a group of white men, at least 2 policemen among them. The men burst into the home she shared with another Black woman, Lucy Smith, and savaged them both. So the reason why her account is important is because she is considered one of the first Black women to testify to Congress. And it literally goes on, this particular story of hers goes on to share how Frances and the other women that follow in the footsteps of reporting this bad behavior from soldiers with the crimes during the Civil War, and making sure it was clear that they did not consent to these attacks. And of course, the published report laid bare whites' cruelties, and locally, Frances Thompson became persona non grata. For the next decade, she would endure police harassment, accused of everything from distributing hoodoo bags and telling fortunes to being responsible for the quote-unquote infamous traffic as a procuress and keeper of one of the vilest dens in the city. And there were more serious allegations. And what I want to point out, and I'm going to jump down to her being arrested and being harassed by the men in the jail and really being forced to wear men's clothing and to be among the male population being harassed and brutalized and all the things. And I want to point out this sentence. And it is, behind bars she suffered, but she never lost her fight, answering rude questions about her gender by responding, "None of your damn business." I think that is so important for us to remember, because people are allowed to live their lives the way that they want to, especially when they are not bothering anyone else. And we cannot talk about Black history while ignoring trans women, while ignoring the LGBTQ plus community. We just can't, because those are my brothers and sisters. And reading their history and learning about their stories is critically important to understanding the history of Black people in this country. Period. Full stop. And even back then, this story goes on to say, Reconstruction died a year later in the Compromise of 1877. Whites had grown tired of defending Black whites, and white hate groups like the KKK continued a reign of terror to discourage African American men from voting. The political battle waged between Republicans and Democrats during the election fiasco of 1876, which would end with the Republican nominee Rutherford B. Hayes taking office. So, yes, slavery ended. Yes, there was Reconstruction. Yes, there was the 14th Amendment. Yes, there was the 15th Amendment. However, Black women still had to fight for everything. And they also, we also have to acknowledge, as the book reads, is Frances's story also lifts a veil on the hidden aspect of Black women's history, one that shows how race, gender, sexuality, and notions of freedom mix in deeply complicated ways. The years after Frances's death are further inflicted with the same spirit of courageousness as Black middle-class women would come to regard this moment as marking a new era for African American womanhood. Beyond controlling their own wombs and choosing their own marital partners, Black women, whether preening in attention-grabbing outfits or wrapped in pristine white as holiness saints, seized upon citizenship. They established organizations, clubs, and businesses. Some fought for reparations and the rights of workers, and a few even honed their creative talents to critical acclaim, all against the backdrop of shrinking rights and political access, intensifying sexual violence and criminalization, and for many, crippling poverty. Which, by the way, throughout this time, Miss Ida B. Wells was also making waves. So I will stop there, and I really want us to consider what I just read. That was happening in the 1800s, but I want you to look and see what is currently happening today. How is that story any different than what we are currently living through? So your homework is going to be to look into the Memphis riots, look into Frances Thompson, but I also want to list out Lucy Hicks Anderson, Marsha P. Johnson, oh, love her, Miss Major Griffin Gracie, Andrea Jenkins, Lady Lava, Tori Cooper, Raquel Willis, Elle Hearns, and Gloria Allen. So go check them out. And then I really want you to reflect on We know that history repeats itself, but how does it end with us?